The Nets make one of the biggest decisions they had to make during the offseason with a decision around the Philadelphia draft pick that they could either choose to keep or to defer. They make that decision. And at the end of the podcast, we're also going to have an exclusive with one Mr. Robert Horry talking about the NBA Finals. It's a packed podcast here on a Friday. We're going to cover it all. But first, the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Doug Norrie, the owner-operator of DFSR.com. If you need some projections for FanDuel and or DraftKings, NBA, MLB, NFL, when the season comes around, NHL too, we got it all covered. PGA got it all covered over there at DFSR. Go check that out. No Adam Armbrecht. You know him as the host of the One Giant podcast where he's covering the New York the week here in the offseason. Game one for the NBA Finals is in the books. Recording this a little bit earlier than that. We're going to have Robert Horry coming on to talk about that later on in the podcast. So make sure you stick around to check that out. We are going to talk, all of us together here in Nets Nation are going to talk today about the news that came out on Wednesday. The Nets had a decision to make about the draft pick heading into this year's draft that they had gotten as part of the Ben Simmons trade when they traded James Harden for Ben Simmons earlier in the season. That was the 23rd pick in the draft, which a first rounder that is Philadelphia's pick. And as part of the deal, the Nets and the Sixers have decided that this could be a pick swap. Or excuse me, a deferment. The Nets could either choose to take Philadelphia's pick this year, which again we know right now is the 23rd pick in the draft, or defer to next year, the 2023 draft, and use it then. It would expire after that. They have to, it's a one or the other. They have to choose this year or next year. The Nets, as was expected from them, did choose the road a little bit. A bunch of reasons, I think, for that. Again, this was around the industry, basically, or around the league, basically to be the expected outcome when it came to the deferment. Like we were me personally, Adam, all of us that had talked about it and read about it, we're really just waiting for them to announce it. They had until midnight Wednesday night or Thursday morning, however you want to define that, to make the decision on the pick. And but it was kind of a foregone conclusion that they would push it to the next season. There's a lot of reasons to do that, so it wasn't all that big of a surprise. They did not wait to the last second to do it. They did it midday on Wednesday to sort of get it out of the way, and that's going to be the case. So what does it mean? It means that this season for the Nets, they do not have any draft picks. They will not be picking either in the first or second round at all. Makes the draft quote unquote easy for them from that standpoint, seeing as how they don't have any decisions to make. The reason for that is they had shipped off their other picks in this draft originally out to Houston as part of the original James Harden deal that shipped off Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, and some pieces, and a ton of draft picks over the next couple of years. And so with their picks already shipped out with the original deal to bring in Harden, it meant that really all their draft equity going forward was going to be what they had kind of recouped in the Simmons for Harden deal with the Sixers. And this was one of those things. But so you ask yourself, like, why would they defer? Like, what were the things to keep in mind? Now, Adam, for his part, he desperately, he loves the draft so much. I do too, but I mean, he really, really loves it. I joked on Twitter that them deferring this 23rd, mid first round pick or late first round pick, it was going to cost him about 20 to 25 podcast episodes of content because he just wanted to be able to break down all the different guys that the Nets could get. And it's super fun to try to figure out who those guys are going to be. Not going to happen this time around. So so we go back to, so outside of a losing it for content standpoint, what does it mean for the Nets to defer this pick and to move it to the next season? Okay. So there's a couple of things that I'm sure were under consideration. One, on a pretty simple level, next year's draft is just supposed to be deeper than this year's draft. That is speculation. You would never know how these things shake out. It's a year from now. Players come, players emerge, players fall back. The draft gets deeper, the draft gets narrower. This kind of stuff is always moving targets. We're going to talk to Rafael Barlow about this over the course of the season. The Locked On Podcast Network draft expert. But there's wide speculation, wide kind of agreement, industry alignment on that the 2023 draft will just offer a deeper set of players. And at 23 this season, maybe the limit was kind of capped on upside talent that the Nets were going to be able to get with that pick. Okay, that makes sense. You want to just, maybe the future looks brighter than the present. Sometimes the grass always does look a little greener. I can hear that point of view. And again, that is a general industry consensus on that. But so that's the one reason. So you say, well, what we could get from the 23rd pick wasn't going to be, quote, worth it if they were just going to retain the pick and end up drafting it, right? Like having to taking like they did last year, where they didn't really move much stuff around. They take Cam Thomas, they take Day'Ron Sharpe, Kessler, all these guys. And really work their way through 5 picks in the draft. To go from 5 picks to 0 is what the Nets end up doing this season. But, maybe they didn't look at this and say, we can't really, it's going to be hard to just on just a draft pick level to get ourselves fair value out of it. Consider that the Sixers had a pretty good run and were the 23rd overall pick. So that's the first part. The second part is starting to think about, why else would they have, other reasons they could have kept it? Well, they could have kept it and put it together with some trade exceptions that they have for the season. Adam, again, desperately wanted that to happen, to be able to get together that, if you consider the trade exceptions to be something of an asset, it's not really, it's more like a mechanism to be able to bring in players that they wouldn't have been able to play to bring in before because of the money swap. That you can entice other teams to kind of send over the money if you're going to attach a draft pick asset to it, and that can be part of the line of thinking too if you're going to keep it this year. The 11.3 from a million straight exception from Harden that expires February 2023, so it's probably not going to be used this offseason. And then they have a couple other, a 3.2 million and a 6.2 million that are going to expire this summer. But they would have to, kind of attach things to it. This is all, by the way, Adam broke this down on Twitter. Make sure you go follow him at Adam Armbrecht over there. So, they to keep the pick this season would have meant, being able to pile it together with a couple of other these things that the Nets have in their coffers from other moves they've made. But ultimately, they decided not to do that. Like they're just going to say they're going to kind of roll with this and kick it down the road to next year. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons for that. We'll go through a couple of them right now. The first and foremost is that having the pick now allows them time to be able to use that pick at the trade deadline for next year when things are, when they're trying to really hone in on what they need. These picks and the ones that they have going forward, like the ones that they were able to retain from the from the move, like they have just as a note about that, they have this year's they go to Houston. The first round pick goes to Houston. They can have Phillies for next year. 2024 they don't have. They're sending that out to Houston. 2025 probably going to Houston or OKC. In 2026 to Houston. So like this is really one of the only first round picks that they have left, and or for a great while in terms of they. They're going to have the 2028 from Philly. So, but they don't really have much in the way of first round picks that they can package together for a player later on down the line. Right now, they don't know what that player is or who that player that they might need. And it's unlikely they're going to be able to know that come draft time to know exactly what their needs are for next season. So retaining the pick into next year makes a lot of sense on a timeline standpoint because, hey, next, come trade deadline, we'll know. Sean Marks and company will know exactly what it is, or like some facsimile of what they need for a championship run. If that's the way things are shaking out, they just can't really know that. It's too soon to know that right now. So to not really know what the greater team needs are as of right this second, coupled with not even knowing like how the rest of the free agency had worked out. And again, they don't get to choose at the draft if they can use it. They had to choose by Wednesday. Having to choose by Wednesday even changed the timeline around like the draft piece of it, right? So like I do think maybe if it had been a later timeline, the decision might have been closer. The reason it's not that close is there's just too many unknowns in the Nets world right now to really hone in on whether or not using that pick is the correct one. So that's the first consideration. Just, giving yourself more of a timeline to not, use the 23rd pick in this year's draft makes sense on a now standpoint, and it makes sense on a future standpoint. There is another reason that the Nets likely were made it even easier to defer this pick to the next year, to next year's draft. And this one might have actually been even the bigger reason. Going to talk about that in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar. Built, we look, every single time we read about Built Bar, we're talking about a new product. That's because Built Bar has just made a commitment to bringing you new products, bringing you delicious stuff. They got the Built Bars, they got the birthday cake puffs, they got it all out there, but now they've got the granola bars here as well. The Built Bar granola bars come in 3 awesome flavors. They got chocolate peanut butter, chocolate coconut, and white chocolate berry. We've been telling you forever that Built Bars just focus on the flavors. This is their thing. They want to make sure the flavor, start with the flavor so it tastes good, unlike some of that other protein stuff that you get out there, which can kind of taste cardboardy, spongy. They're not doing that. They're focused on the flavors, make sure they start there, then they back it up with the stats, back it up with the analytics. They have 150 calories, 15 grams of protein, just 4 grams of sugar. Go try to find that in another one of those granola bars that are sitting there on the grocery store shelf. You're not going to find that. You got to check out the Built Bar granola bars right now. You go to built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15. You're going to get 15% off of your order. Use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Okay, the other reason that the Nets, or in conjunction with why the Nets would defer, not even from the timeline standpoint, like we just said, it's going to be, more likely to know what assets you need going forward, more likely to know what the team exactly needs, more likely that other teams are going to be willing to shop players around the trade deadline when they know where they are, right? We know the trade deadline can heat up in terms of player movement, obviously more than just in the regular season. So you might just not even be able to find a suitor if you wanted to ship the pick right now. So it's using the pick now as an asset is also just kind of worse. Like, teams are going to value that pick much more later on. Teams tend to value the picks more when they're in their own hands as well. Like, it's like harder to draft a player and then trade them. So there's lots of ways that these picks are viewed from an equity standpoint when it comes to other teams around the league. But the other piece about why the Nets might have looked at this pick to say, even with all the unknowns, another piece that makes the pick some, not likely, but a chance at significantly more value is that the Sixers could just nosedive next season. Right? Like, we know what the Sixers became this season. They had an MVP level performance from Joel Embiid. They got Harden late in the game, at the trade deadline. We obviously know how that turned out, where he just tanked to get out of Brooklyn and then went over to Philly. They finished 4th in the East, 51-31. Like I said, Embiid played almost the entire season. Like, for him, he put up MVP level numbers. This was one of the better outcomes you could probably assume that could come out of Philly, especially when it comes to age and health regressions and all that stuff. Very good chance the Nets looked at this and said, man, let's play this out like a few hundred times, right? Let's do this little simulation around what the Sixers season could look like. Do we think they're going to be 51-31 again? We saw some tailing off of Harden there in the playoffs. We don't know what his conditioning is going to be like. Embiid has had injury history in the past. No one's rooting for injury here, by the way. Like, we're not rooting for an injury so the Nets can get a better draft pick. No. Please, no one bring that up to anyone this season. I'm just saying, from a realistic standpoint, if you're looking at, how the past has played out with this team, with Embiid specifically, the guy's just a huge body, getting some miles on him now, has had injury stuff in the past. And considering how just unbelievably he with him this season, or some regression at all because he put in a lot of miles this year going into the playoffs, is 51-31 a realistic number for the Sixers to hit next year? I don't know. Maybe they better. Maybe, full season of Embiid healthy, full season Harden gets after it in the gym, just recommits to just making sure the body's in perfect shape. He's got something to prove going into next year. That could happen. And at that point, this pick likely looks worse because that team, we've seen that team, at least especially from a regular season standpoint, which probably steamroll a lot through a pretty good win and loss record. But, there's the other way that this works out. Embiid has a history of injuries, like I said. If he misses significant time, that really, really cuts into the talent level. Harden doesn't recommit to stuff, or, I mean, doesn't resign, which is also another possibility that we don't know. If for some reason that thing just spirals and he heads out into the open market too as a free agent, like there's a world where like they just look so much worse. And I think the Nets had to do a little bit of that calculus. I think they had to look at that situation and say, we know right now that they have the 23rd pick. If we look at all the different ways a Sixers season could shake out for next year, I think there's more than a few possibilities that this pick looks a lot better. Again, it could look worse. They could make a massive run. They could end up being a dominant regular season team with those two guys at the very top, plus a Tyrese Maxey, plus Tobias Harris, who's overpaid but still good. Like that's a really good regular season team. Their record could be really good. The pick looks worse, but is it an acceptable risk to go into it now and say, this is the risk. We know what it is now. There's a world where I don't think we're talking lottery pick, but is there a world where it's just more in sort of the mid first round rather than the later first round? I think that's a level-headed way to approach it. I think most logical people would look at the situation and think that this Philly season in the past played out pretty darn well, all things considered from a health perspective. I mean, I know they didn't have Simmons, but they kept Embiid healthy the entire season. And I just think that that's a pretty easy call at that point. So to kind of recap, we have the part where they had to make the decision Wednesday, and a little bit less than a month before the draft. Okay, that's going to be tough. Nets don't know even who is on their squad right now. Like we don't even know like who is going to fill out the rest of the roster. No Kyrie Irving, no Kyrie Irving decision right now. No Bruce Brown decision. No Nick Claxton decision. All this stuff hasn't even been worked out. That's going to start July 1st. And that's after the draft too. And so, at that point, they're just not going to really know. They don't know enough about their current team. So you put that together, you put together the piece where the draft just isn't as deep this year, in theory. And then you look at the situation where the Sixers are maybe possibly much worse next season. And you have a situation that ends up making this like kind of a pretty easy call. So I'd be interested to hear what people think about this. You can go and comment. Make sure you comment on YouTube. Like, do you think this is the right decision? Kind of took the lay of the land here. Didn't seem like anyone was really all that upset, except for, like I said, Adam. And that was strictly from a content piece. He was looking to really wanting to do the deep dive on all the guys that the Nets were going to be able to get at 23. I thought those list was decent in just a kind of a first glance through the landscape. I thought there was a world where the Nets could, gets a kind of a win now-ish piece around that, or, maybe a little bit looking toward the future piece with that 23rd pick in the draft. And so he's upset, but I didn't think the rest of you all out there are kind of, thinking the same way. I think everyone kind of has the same idea around just a logical approach to how to use these very few assets the Nets have. They're going to need to use these really, really wisely over the next couple of seasons because they just don't have much left in the cupboard as the way it stands right now because of the other deals they made. This is what happens to you when you're a really good team on a championship run, unless you get sort of lucky with timing of the Warriors and take a season off and get to pile together a couple first round lottery picks. But except for those guys, most other teams end up working it out this way. So I think logical decision, all things considered. And we kind of saw this one coming. All right. After the break, special interview here with Robert Horry, Big Shot Bob over there, jumped on with Peter Bukowski from it's an exclusive for the Locked On Network. He's talking all stuff about the NBA Finals, his experiences in the finals, what to look for as this series unfolds here for the finals. Really cool interview. Really lucky to have him. Really great to just be on the Locked On Network where they're able to get big names like this. We're able to just bring in superstar guys, guys that have just kind of legends, especially when you look at his resume from the finals. So Robert Horry coming on after the break here. And then, we'll be back next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball. Check it out. Robert Horry on Locked On Today with Peter Bukowski.
The Golden State Warriors are minus 150, the favorites in the NBA Finals against the Boston Celtics. Joining me now, Robert Horry, 7-time NBA champion, is here courtesy of BetOnline. Check out BetOnline for all the up-to-date lines on the NBA Finals, Finals MVP, Finals props, and each and every game line. This is great to have you here. Why do you think, because the line has moved a little bit, in the Celtics' favor, why do you think there are people that like the Celtics matchup against the Warriors?
Because the smart people know defense wins championships. And if you look at the Celtics team, they got 2 players on that team that made the all defensive team. Smart, of course, defensive player of the year, but Robert Williams is one of those guys that he's an eraser. He can block shots. He can, he can erase a lot of mistakes that you make on the perimeter. And you think about, you got Brown, Tatum, and Smart, who can get up on people defensively and funnel them to that guy. Next thing you know, it's getting blocked. And if you look at the way, Hartford has been playing, he's turned back the hands of time. He's blocking shots again. So overall, I think that the Celtics is a better defensive team than the Warriors, because even though you have Draymond Green, Klay Thompson is not the Klay Thompson of old who can do the things he used to be able to do. And so I just think that's a big key for them, for the Celtics, that is.
How do you see Defensive Player of the Year Marcus Smart matching up with Steph Curry? Is that going to be something where you see that Marcus is going to pick him up 94 feet? Like, how do you think Smart is going to approach that assignment if he does get that assignment, which we assume he's going to?
But you know what? I don't think it's going to be a one-man job. If you look at the Celtics, they 1, 2, 3 are all athletic guys, and you go to the 2, Jalen, and go to the Tatum, they get taller. It's like like the bars on a cell phone. And I think even though they like to do a lot of switching, I think they're perfect for this matchup. It's a perfect matchup for the Celtics, and when they got to guard them, because Klay is going to be constantly moving. And so sort of, not the same as a Jimmy Butler or Tyler Hero, but I think what they just did against the Heat is like a prelude to what they're going to do. And so I think they're going to be fine defensively, switching and getting ready for Steph.
It sounds like you like the Celtics in this one.
All my Laker fans are going to be mad at me because they say you cannot wear anything green. You can never root for the Celtics. I'm not rooting for the Celtics. I would like to see my former teammate Ime Udoka win his first championship, so I would like for that to happen. But, I just think being the basketball mindset, I just think that there's a good chance the Celtics could win this thing.
All right, so we have some odds here. Celtics in 6 is plus 375. Celtics in 7 is plus 650. If people are going to bet on it, what is your prediction? If you like Boston, 6, 7?
Hey, you know what? If you try to make some money, right? that's why you gamble. And so I would go with the Celtics in 7, because I think the Celtics have been a battle-tested team on the road. They've won a lot of games on the road. They just won the Eastern Conference on the road. And so I think they're ready. Not saying everybody will say, well, the Heat is a different monster than, the Warriors and blah, blah, blah. But I still think it all boils down to having confidence and playing well on the road and believing that you can win on the road.
There's also been this discussion now, especially among Celtics fans, about what this Celtics team has had to face, particularly who Jason Tatum has had to face. Kevin Durant in the first round, Giannis Antetokounmpo in the second round, Jimmy Butler on a heater, no pun intended, for Miami, and now Steph Curry. You're talking about at least 3 pantheon guys who are all-time great players. Who do you think has the most on the line legacy-wise in this series? For whom would that one title, you won 7, who would that one title mean the most for?
I'm going to go off script a little bit, and I'm going to stop people from thinking this is going to be the greatest run ever by the Celtics. That's not true, because you got Hornacek, Karl Malone, you got Kevin Johnson, Charles Barkley, you got Dennis Rodman, MVP, David Robinson, then you got Shaquille and Penny. Now that is the greatest run back in '95. So when people say this might be the greatest run, stop it. You know what I'm saying? Because all these teams was 55, 50 plus win teams. And so I just think if you look at this game and you have to pick an MVP, of course it's going to be Tatum, but this run that the Celtics are on is incredible. Don't get me wrong, because they've been able to win on the road, which is key, because you have to win on the road in order to win championship. That's unless you have home court advantage and you protect your home court. But I just think overall, when you look at the makeup of these two teams, they're similar. Golden State Warriors, they were the Celtics 6-7 years ago when they first entered the playoffs. And nobody thought they could win a championship. Next thing you know, they win a championship. Then the following season, they win all these games and don't win a championship. And then they get KD and they win 2 more. But I think if you look at the Celtics, there are so many similarities with these teams that people are always going to say, oh, let's go with the veteran leadership. Let's go with the fan favorite and Steph. Let's think about it, because everybody wants Steph to win, because we know he got robbed one time with the MVP in the finals, and then he took a step back and let KD come in to his team, which is Steph's team, and take 2 MVPs. And so I do think Steph has a lot to prove, and his legacy is on the line when it comes to this, because all the chatter now is about him not having a MVP in the finals, which we all know he was robbed and won. So let's be real about that.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at these MVP odds as you're talking about the MVP, and we expect Curry and Tatum right at the top in terms of the odds. You're not getting really good value there. I'm looking at Jaylen Brown 10-1. Yeah. I'm looking at Draymond 22-1. Like, if he really turned it up defensively, people forget in that game 7 against the Cavs, he had a triple-double in that game. He was the best Warrior on the floor in that game. I'm looking at Marcus Smart at 40-1. It seems like you can get some good value. And we've seen, including in this Warriors run, that it's not always the stars who win these finals MVPs.
It's true. For me, if I wanted to take the odds, I'm going to eliminate the top 3 automatically. And I don't think Clay is, Clay is a game 5, game 6 type of player. But me, I would go with Andrew Wiggins. If I had to pick someone with the odds, I would go with Andrew Wiggins, who is 20-1. And think about it. He has started to come into his own.
Yep.
After that dunk on Luka, all of a sudden this dude is smiling big. He's enthusiastic. He's playing hard, and he's an all-star. I think some people forget he was an all-star. I think this is a good way, and the biggest stage, to show everybody that the all-star committee didn't make a mistake. So if I had to take because I don't think Draymond Green, he doesn't shoot enough, and he's gonna have to guard too many people. So he's gonna be all over the board. So if you look down that list of people and you want to say, odds maker, for me, I would take Andrew Wiggins 20-1.
That is, that's bold. I love it. I think you're right that he seems to be a different player. Just in the Warriors, just in Golden State, he seems to have been unlocked a little bit, whether that's Steve Kerr, whether that's just him feeling more comfortable. We're talking about legacy. And you have been on some teams that have gone on these multi-year runs that have been what we might consider dynastic, right? There have been some discussions here. If the Warriors win one, that because it's the Clay, Steph, Draymond core with Steve Kerr, that this has to be considered part of the Warriors run, and that we have to call them a dynastic team. Where do you fall on that discussion? If they win one, are they a dynasty?
You know what? I will put them in that category as a dynasty. Because they was riddled with injuries,
right?
2 years, Clay was out, and Steph went out. You say, okay, we'll give them a Phil Jackson asterisk by those 2 years. But if they're able to get back to the mountaintop and win this year, I would put them, you got one more step to be a dynasty. And then if they go to the finals again, then I would give them a dynasty. But, think about this. They gave us a dynasty in the Lakers. We won 3 in a row. And next thing you know, they dismantle a team. They go back and lose. It's considered a dynasty. So, to me, there's only been, 3 dynasties in this: Bulls, the Celtics, and the Lakers, because they're in a situation where they went 6+ championships. That's what you look at. But in this day, in this era, you can give them a dynasty.
I think I would consider the Spurs, the Tim Duncan, Greg Popovich Spurs in that mix, but they never won back-to-back titles. And so it depends on how you want to qualify it. Sustained success, not always enough. I think if you're a Boston fan, you're going, why can't we have that sustained run? We've got these 2 young superstars, Marcus Smart, Defensive Player of the Year, who's coming into his own a little bit defensively. It seems like they've unlocked some things with him as their pure point guard in initiating offense, because he doesn't have to create for everyone. They've got Tatum and Brown who can create for themselves. I mean, what do you think the chances are that they could be not the next dynasty, but the next team that you have to deal with in the Eastern Conference? Like, okay, they're going to be there every year until further notice.
I think you look down that line and you says, okay, Tatum, first team, max. Brown, max. Smart, max. These are super max contracts these guys potentially can get. Right. So now since I cover the Lakers got $40 million guys, $40 million guys. They can't get nobody else on the team unless they do some hell of a drafting, and they get those guys that's going to be there. But it boils down to payday, man. If you're going to stick around and get paid, or you're going to have that one falter and say, oh, we didn't win a championship, we need to make a move because, they exploited us in this area. We need to get someone in, and they trade one of those guys. People do dumb things like that. Well, GMs, I should say. So I think they have the potential to make a long run. They're just going to have to stick together and do what a Tim Duncan would do and say, I'm going to take less money so you can sign a Tony Parker, you sign a Manu Ginobili. But are these guys now, selfless enough where they say, hey, you know what? I don't want to make 40 million. I'll make 30 million. I don't think so. I think every guy now is trying to get their bag so they can say, you know what? At one point in my career, I was making 50, 40 million, whatever it may be. So that's going to be the key though. It boils down to money if they can keep that team together.
All right, not a finals question, but I can't talk to Big Shot Bob and not ask you this question. Which of your big shots is your favorite?
I grew up a Lakers fan, a huge Magic Johnson fan. And one of my biggest thrills before I even made to the NBA, I got to play one-on-one with Magic when I was being scouted by the Lakers coming out of college, coming out of University of Alabama. So the shot I made against the Sacramento Kings in 2001 to win that game is probably my favorite. And don't get me wrong, I love what I did in Houston. I love what I did in San Antonio. But everything I did in San Antonio was on the road, Game 5 on the road. But this was at home in Staples Center. And the ego comes into play where you want to hear that crowd chant your name, man. And you run off the court and the crowd's still chanting your name. You in the locker room, you can still hear them chanting your name. So I think that shot, it takes over all the other shots just for the ego. All as athletes got some type of ego. And I think for me, that just takes over because I had the Laker fans chanting my name. They wasn't chanting Shaq. They wasn't chanting Kobe. They were chanting Horry. So that's a big plus for me.